are coordinated by myself. I'm Erin Bunting from Michigan State University. This is Jane Southworth from University of Florida, Hannah Herrero from University of Tennessee. And so the topics today, big data, GeoAI, redefining landscapes, and that's going to be our topic for our tomorrow as well. So we have 5 speakers in our session, and for our speakers, microphone obviously, and I've been told a clicker is coming to help you forward through the slides. So thank you so much for your patience. We appreciate you sticking around, and we'll start here shortly.
The impact of GeoAI and big data in Earth observation. My name is Hannah Herrero from the University of Tennessee. We also have co-organizers Jane Southworth from the University of Florida and Erin Bunting in the back from Michigan State, helping with some of our tech. So our first speaker in this session is going to be Claudia Viana from the University of Portugal.
Hello, thank you. So I think I will try to manage the best way to do my presentation, since I cannot change my slides, and that got me a little nervous. So my name is Claudia, I'm from University of Lisbon. I'm a postdoctoral researcher, and I will talk a little bit about the project that I'm developing for the past year and a half. So this session is all about GeoAI and big data, reshaping land system science. And my topic, it's kind of a small part of how these tools and techniques can help analyze historical agroecological trends. This is the best one. So can you change for the next slide, please? So why analyze historical agroecological trends? Well, this comes from my experience as a PhD student some years ago, and some collaborations that I made with researchers from different scientific fields, including history. And from that time I understood that there was this gap on how to collect and processing historical data that could be helpful to analyze agroecological and other topics in land use science. So as a geographer and GIS expert, let's say, I wanted to contribute with new tools and to create some new frameworks that could help them and my own research. Next one, please. So why historical agroecological data is important, or overall why historical data is important? It helps us somehow to understand, to give new insights, not only about our current agricultural land systems, but also for imagine projecting future changes. With this type of data, historical data, we can have more reliable projections, and also understand what was the pattern that agricultural land system had for the past years or decades, which is the case. So yes, historical agroecological data matters not only to identify these long-term trends, establish some insights or baselines for not only agriculture but ecological systems, and also to help on these projections for future, and help for management and new policies for a better world, let's say. And next slide, please. However, there is some challenge and limitation regarding using these historical data, not only because of their quality, but also the way we can assess the accessibility to this data. And not only because they are fragmented, they are inconsistent. Normally, we are talking about analog records, and we have to somehow work with this and try to change for digital format and extract all the information for analysis. So how can GeoAI techniques can make difference? Next slide. I want to bring you the AgroEco Decipher project, which I'm a coordinator, and for the aim of this project is exactly to deal with this challenge and limitations and show somehow how can these GeoAI techniques can help not only for the collection and processing part, but also for the last, and I think the one that all of us want normally, which is analyze and get new insights and new knowledge with this type of research. So this project, you can see the overview project missions. We are talking about choose a main historical source, and from that try to extract, process, and organize the historical records in order to be able to use in our research and the type of frameworks that nowadays we are used to use. So for that, I will show you that which GeoAI techniques we are using for digitizing, harmonizing, and analyze this historical data. Also some GIS tools, because we have cartographic analog information, and trying to make this new information accessible for the larger audience. Next slide, please. So I have to be really quick. The first task of our project was this digitizing historical source. We choose a main source. It is a survey from the 1950s. This survey, we had some agronomists and forestries travel around all Portugal in the decade, 50 decade, and they were collecting information about not only agriculture but forestry, environment, and how it was at that time. So they wrote these surveys, and we have one survey for each municipality of Portugal, and we try to apply this methodology to these surveys. So we collect all these surveys. We have 270 surveys, and we digitize all these surveys, which a total amount of 44,000 pages. It took some hours to do all these first tasks, but we were able to do it in the first year of the project. Next, please. And after that, we had to recognize the text. We want to extract the text from each page. So we had to figure out which OCR, optical character recognition, software we would choose to do this processing part. And we asked ChatGPT if he could give us some insights about nowadays which softwares are being using in the literature, and he suggests 5 softwares, and we test these 5 suggestions with the level of precision, and we figured out that Amazon Text Extract could be used to recognize the text in each page that was digitized. Next one, please. However, this was a test that we made for one page. When we start doing for all the surveys and all the pages, because of the poor quality of some of the pages, we understood that the level of precision was not good. We test for 19 surveys, and we got less than 60% of precision on optical character recognition. So we had to figure out how we would recognize the remaining characters, and we also used ChatGPT to do that job, and we increased the precision, and we got almost 700% of character recognition, and we were able to finish this task regarding collecting and processing data. Next, please. We also are working on the cartographic. We are trying to do automatic process to vectorize, to georeference and vectorize all these old maps. We are still working on that, and I don't have time to explain, so next, please. And the best part, what we can do with this type of text information, we are now exploring not only some traditional statistics like correlation, Pearson correlation, to understand what are the correlations between some crops around the different Portuguese regions, and also trying to understand the importance of each crop across the regions. For this, we are based on the words that are the terms that gonna appear in each survey. So this is an algorithm that we are using. It's a Python library, and we understood in our first test that corn as a main is the cereal with most importance in north region of Portugal. And next slide, because I don't have time. And we are also testing other Python libraries to do this word tokenization and understand what clusters can exist or exist past regarding the predominant crops in North Portugal. And we were able to for now, not just understand by the text, but also specializing this data and have these overall idea about what was happening in the 50s decade in north region of Portugal. So as a final, it finished. But you can see the final slide where we highlight the challenge and limitation of trying to do this type of work with historical data, and yes, unfortunately I have to finish. Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and save questions for the very end since we are running a little bit behind, but I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Okay, welcome everybody to my talk. Thanks for showing up. I hope you're not tired from lunch, but I try to stimulate here a bit. My name is Philippe Ruffin. I'm a postdoc in UCLouvain. I'm a remote sensing scientist by training, but also a land system scientist, and trying to link these two disciplines and make the most out of remote sensing for land system science, basically. And in this talk, I want to present to you a work that is targeting field delineation in smallholder landscapes in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, so the relevance of field delineation based on Earth observation data can be broadly separated into two streams of application. One thing is field-level analytics of productivity indicators, land management. We may be interested in optimizing resource use at the field scale. From our land system science angle, we may be interested in quantifying field size across larger regions, such as countries. Field size is an indicator linked to land use intensity, it is linked to biodiversity, and it responds to policy interventions such as land consolidation programs. So it's a really relevant indicator for us to understand the structure of agricultural systems. It's quite addressing a broad array of applications, and therefore it's also relevant to a broad array of stakeholders that can make use of such data that can derive from satellite imagery. Unfortunately, and many of you know this probably, the knowledge on field size is quite limited, especially when we look into spatially detailed data sets. We know that we have survey data, we have census data, but these data are limited to data that is representative at the administrative unit level, so we don't really get the spatial detail that we want. There are self-reporting biases that we may be aware of, etc. So why are there no real good estimates of field size, particularly not in smallholder landscapes? And I want to illustrate this using this drone capture that we collected in the field to take a look at this landscape, which we can see is really, really fragmented. So we have a lot of very small fields that I can overlay. So you see the presence of very small fields in this landscape. Within field, heterogeneity is high, so we have diverse crops, vegetation conditions, etc. within each of these individual fields, and the landscape is really complex. Now, from a remote sensing perspective, usually we don't look at this type of image data, but we look at something that is a bit coarser. So I'm aggregating now artificially to 50 centimeter resolution, 1.5 meter, and 3 meter spatial resolution. So this is kind of the best case commercially available data from Planet, for example, that we can think about in this landscape. And you can see it's really hard to reconstruct visually these field boundaries that we were able to capture before. Okay, so this is just to illustrate the challenges. The objectives of my work is basically to compile a workflow that is having low requirements for training data, and is thus also easily transferable across geographic regions and realms. This work is already kind of completed, so there's a paper on that if you're interested in reading it. But I will skip these technical details for now and focus a bit more on the results. The next objective is to basically produce national level data sets of each individual field in these smallholder regions of Mozambique, covering 800,000 square kilometers, so it's a very large region, and then to explore the spatial distribution of field size and cropland and their dynamics. To give you a glimpse, we are using commercial, very high resolution Earth observation data in this work. It's spot data at 1.5 meter spatial resolution, so you can really easily discern individual trees, shrubs, small huts, houses, small walkways, and of course, most importantly, also field boundaries in these types of data. You can see also that the image looks a bit weird because it is composed of acquisitions from different parts of the year. So on the left-hand side, you see the landscape in more greenish tones. This is in season. And on the right-hand side, the neighboring image is basically from the off-season. Thus, the landscape appears a bit more in these brownish colors. We now run this workflow for field delineation over these types of image data and obtain something that looks like this. So we get one polygon object for each individual field in the landscape that we can then map out, for example, by calculating the area of each of these polygons and see how is the distribution of field size at the field level in this landscape. And we can see here we have a rather consolidated landscape with larger fields of up to 2 hectares that are surrounded by really, really many small fields. But there are also, of course, very differently looking examples. So another type of landscape that is a bit more extensive. We don't have really this high share of cropland in the landscape, but it's a bit more scarce. There are some fields that are under extensive management that appear a bit larger, but also many, many smaller fields in these types of landscape. So what do we do with all this data? Because it's really bulky. We have 800,000 square kilometers of this 1.5 meter resolution image data. We obtain tens of millions of polygons, so it's not really easy to work with. So the most straightforward thing is to aggregate this basically into grid cells to calculate, for example, what is the share of cropland in each grid cell. We can assess the distribution of field size. So just taking all the polygons within a grid cell, looking into the histogram of field size, and then we assess metrics such as the median or selected percentiles of the distribution of field size in these regions. And that gives us a nice indication about the spatial patterns of field size. The first very basic finding, because this is also challenging with existing map products, is to assess the distribution of cropland. What we get here is a really nice result that resembles what we would have expected, where we have higher cropland fractions or pretty high cropland fractions surrounding settlements and urban agglomerations. We can see highlighted a bit in the north of the country, transgressing from west to east, the Nacala development corridor, which is a huge agricultural development project that really sticks out there. But we also have higher fractions of cropland surrounding the borders to Zambia and Malawi. And then we can play around with this data and, for example, compare against the distribution of population. This is a very simple exercise. It's still a bit premature, but just comparing these two maps, we can see where there are people. There's also cropland, so visually alone, this makes sense. Then we would be interested in assessing field size. So what is really the distribution of field size? And if we look into median field size, so 50th percentile, we see that the distribution is really, really at the lower end. So the dominant field size is smaller than 0.15 hectares, which are tiny fields overall. We find some local clusters of larger field sizes that can be related to various actors, and I'm just going to pick a few examples here. In the south, at the coast, we have super fragmented smallholder landscapes with tiny, tiny fields. In the north, we find shifting cultivation practices with somewhat more extensive management, with larger fields. There are clusters of large fields here, a bit closer to the Zambian border, where management is even more extensive and the fields are super duper large. But there are also large fields down here, in this case an agro-industrial operation for sugarcane cultivation. So just poking into the map and rechecking with the image data that we have, we get a nice impression of the results. And then we can basically overlay a field size map from 2017 and 2023 to assess if there's change in field size over time. This result is even more preliminary, so I put that on the slide so you know. But what we find here are pretty widespread land consolidation processes, particularly in the rural regions, but also patterns of basically cropland fragmentation where field size has become smaller in this period of time. And you can see the scale still, these are relatively small changes, all in all. Just as an anecdotal confirmation from the field, so we talked to farmers when we were doing a field campaign, and this lady, for example, told us her story that she was able to acquire her neighbor's land who fell ill. She was able to compensate for the land, acquire it, and integrate it into her farming operation. And she was then able to produce a bit more surplus to market on the regional markets. Another example is this farmer who was able to invest into agriculture from his non-farm employment income, and was able to acquire, for example, an irrigation pump, a small tractor, to have a relatively large farming operation in relative terms always, but a bit different from what we have seen in other places of Mozambique. So this is just to give you a glimpse of these results. And since the session chairs asked particularly for questions about data ethics, I mean, the key thing that really allows me and the colleagues to do this type of work is access to this VHR imagery. Most of the openly available image data is not fit for field delineation in sub-Saharan Africa, so this is a really challenging problem, and you can see here that the Landsat resolution, Sentinel-2 resolution, and as I mentioned earlier, even PlanetScope, if we consider 5 meter, is not really sufficient. Higher spatial resolution for this application means better results, and this is what we show on this lower right-hand graph, where you can see spatial resolution on the x-axis, and the higher, the better the results become, basically. So the idea was here to really collect a group of experts that are occupied with smallholder agriculture and its sustainability, people that have also been working extensively with field delineation, to formulate this call for action, to push the commercial providers that are sitting on these data archives that we have been using here to release them, at least in parts, for sustainability-centered research, for research that would accelerate and enhance progress towards the SDGs. Okay, and then lastly, maybe this is interesting for some of you, we have really downloaded a bulk of this data, not only for Mozambique, but more countries, and if you're interested in using it, please reach out, I'm happy to share. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Up next, we have Lucy Wells, who's a PhD student from the University of Edinburgh.
Okay, so my name is Lucy. I'm from Edinburgh University, and I'm going to be sharing some work from my PhD, which is working on mapping the world's dry tropical biomes. So thank you again to my supervisors and collaborators and the CSOR network, who provide a lot of amazing plot data across Southern Africa. So dry tropical biomes cover between 40 and 50% of the world's tropics, but they are generally poorly studied and quite threatened. So they're very challenging to map, and because there's many different vegetation types in the dry tropics. So I've kind of tried to illustrate some sort of structural differences here. So you can see some of them are sort of very uniform, some have a grassy component, and in some areas in particular, an understory is a very important component. But these kind of have sort of lots of contested names, so variably you could call these ecosystems savannas, dry woodlands, shrublands, grasslands, and this makes it quite difficult to understand what we're talking about. A key, like an important thing with these is that they are managed differently. So we do need to understand the differences between them and where they are in space. And a few reasons that this is challenging is because these biomes generally exist in the same climate space, which means that if we use traditional biomapping methods of just mapping biomes based on climate, it's not very effective in these regions. They're also disturbance-maintained ecosystems, so some of them will burn, typically the ones with a grassy underlayer, and some of them won't. And Earth observation methods are quite challenging as well, because many methods are designed for forested ecosystems. Particularly the use of canopy cover is not that effective in dry biomes. So as part of my PhD, we are trying to develop an approach using Earth observation on various things like vegetation structure, disturbance, and phenology to map dry tropical vegetation. So we develop a methodology to combine these different EO level layers along with kind of a good ecological understanding of what's going on in separate dry biomes. We use these in 2 case studies. So the northeast of Brazil, which is highly interdigitated, there's lots of biomes which are spatially heterogeneous. And then in the southern hemisphere of Africa, which also has lots of different vegetation types, which are often named based on floristic composition rather than things like function. So a brief sort of workflow of my methods. So instead of using climate data, as I mentioned, we've used vegetation attributes from Earth observation data, which aim to look at structure and phenology. And then we use some unsupervised fuzzy clustering approaches to mapping. And this allows us to get sort of the probability of membership within each vegetation cluster that we get. And I'm just going to talk you through the 2 case studies that we have looked at. So the northeast of Brazil is mostly made up of what's called caatinga vegetation, which is sort of quite shrubby, low stature vegetation, which typically doesn't burn. But there's also cerrado, so savanna, and rainforest vegetation in the region. So the aim of this part of the work was to try and operationalize the IUCN's global ecosystem typology. So this is a new way of mapping the world's biomes, and it's based trying to emphasize vegetation structure and composition and ecosystem processes. I've just put the link there in case anybody's interested. So we find in the northeast of Brazil 8 vegetation types, including the rainforest and cerrado savanna, and then 6 different types of caatinga. So you can kind of see that it's really, really mixed. It ranges from, you can kind of see the top photograph there is more shrubby, short stature. There's the presence of more cacti. And then in the middle photograph, arboreal caatinga is a bit more of a forested structure, but still doesn't have the grassy underlayer that you can see from the cerrado, which is the bottom photograph. And then comparing it to the IUCN typology. Okay, so we can see that it matches fairly well to 3 different types of vegetation. So the tropical dry forest relates roughly to the arboreal caatinga, which you just saw in the photograph, and then the cerrado and savanna match quite well, as long as the rainforest as well. And then, however, most of the caatinga groups don't really fit any of the IUCN typologies groups at the moment, so we're kind of proposing that they should include a new type ecosystem functional group within their typology. So just in the middle of finishing off that paper. And then looking at Southern Africa. So Southern Africa, again, there's lots of different types of biomes there, often named in terms of their floristic composition, and we were interested in finding out whether floristic composition matches our kind of structural approach. And again, there was 8 different vegetation types, so 2 sort of very dry, shrubby, deserty vegetation types, 2 types of rainforest, and then what we're mostly interested in, which is kind of the middle portion, which is 2 types of savanna, and mostly separated out by their fire regime, and then 2 types of dry forest. So the savanna A is the more fire-prone ecosystem, so you can kind of see it covers the area of the south of Angola, which is one of the most fire-prone regions in the world. And then the 2 different types of dry forests. So the light blue is kind of covering the highlands of Angola and around the edges of the Congo Basin. And then The pink, so dry forest B, is looking at the Bakia woodlands, again in the north of Angola, and the coastal forests down the coast of Tanzania. And then we compared these to the floristic composition using the Seesaw network, which is a network of plots across southern Africa. So we used 8,400 plots and gave them floristic groups. So you can see that there's 3 different types of roughly what you would call Miombo woodland, which is a classic kind of savanna woodland across southern Africa, and then a very mixed group and 2 monodominant groups. So the Mapani and Androstachus groups, which that species basically covers all of those plots. And then we compared this to the structural map. So we don't actually have plots in the Congo region or the desert areas, but we're just mostly interested in the center. So the main takeaway here is we're looking at the percentage of the floristic group found in each structural cluster, and I guess the main story is that it's very mixed, so structure doesn't really match floristic composition. So we need to be probably more careful in including a broader understanding of what's going on in different vegetation types when we're naming them and then for managing them. So to finish off, we can reveal previously unmapped biodiversity in the dry tropics using Earth observation. And in particular, the use of fire has helped to separate out different types of savanna. This is important. If you're thinking about management, you shouldn't manage everywhere as a savanna. There's different types of savanna. And the use of Earth observation beyond sort of canopy cover and forest, non-forest binaries has really allowed us to make a much more nuanced map. But there's some caveats. This map it's really hard to validate on the ground because we've used unsupervised methods. And it requires a significant amount of ecological understanding of what's going on in these biomes to both produce and interpret the maps. Okay. And just our final point, so we have been able to accurately map functionally different biomes across both continents. And next, I'm aiming to work on a global dry tropical map using this, as well as finishing my PhD. That's my contact details. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And up next, we have Michelle Sims, who is a research associate at the World Resources Institute.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Sims. I'm a geospatial research associate with the World Resources Institute. And today I'm going to be presenting on our work mapping the global drivers of forest loss that we are partnering with Google DeepMind to produce. Oh, gotcha. Great. So just a bit of an introduction for those who are unfamiliar. I work with the Land and Carbon Lab, which is an initiative at WRI that aims to provide decision makers with the data, insights, and analyses they need to solve some of the world's most pressing challenges. And this initiative builds off over a decade of work with the Global Forest Watch Initiative, which is another initiative at WRI, which aims to provide the best available data and user-driven tools on global forest monitoring in a free and open platform. All right. So just starting off with some background, one of the major breakthroughs in global forest monitoring that was key in launching Global Forest Watch was the publication of global data on annual tree cover loss produced by the University of Maryland and first published in 2013. Since then, it's been updated annually and made available on Global Forest Watch. And this has been a major advancement in consistent and transparent forest monitoring at a global scale. However, the data do not distinguish between deforestation or conversion of forests to other land uses, such as agriculture, versus temporary disturbances such as degradation or management, such as logging or wildfire or other disturbances that are more likely to be temporary in nature. So distinguishing these differences are important for several reasons. First of all, they have different implications for really the underlying dynamics of what is happening in any given region. They have very different carbon and ecological implications. There are different policy responses that are appropriate for the different causes of loss. And just generally understanding what is causing losses and distinguishing more permanent from temporary drivers is important for understanding the context of any given region. So we have some prior work that we've undertaken with partners mapping the drivers of forest loss at 10-kilometer resolution globally. This was first published in 2018, and it's been really important as a contextual data set at Global Forest Watch to help users understand the context for our global annual tree cover loss data. However, it's pretty coarse resolution and not really appropriate for local applications. So with this in mind, our objective was to improve the available global data on the drivers of forest loss by adopting a new modeling approach and publishing global maps with increased spatial and thematic resolution. So we have two work streams with this broad goal. The first that I'm going to start with is presenting the dominant driver of forest loss from 2001 to 2022 at 1 kilometer resolution. Sorry for this formatting thing here. So this work is a little bit more advanced. We're currently preparing a paper to submit for publication and planning to release the data early next year. And so this, so what we mean by dominant here is dominant in space, meaning that we are attributing the driver that caused the majority of loss area within each 1 kilometer grid cell throughout the whole time period. And loss, by loss we mean loss as defined by the UMD global annual tree cover loss data. So we're building a model that can be used in conjunction with that product. So in this project, we've grouped drivers of loss into 7 categories. So the first is permanent agriculture. This is conversion of tree cover to agricultural use, which can include pasture, small to large scale commodity agriculture, or just small scale agriculture in general. Hard commodities can include small to large scale mining, as well as energy infrastructure such as solar panels or oil drilling. Shifting cultivation is found primarily in the tropics, and that we define as clearing of forests for temporary cultivation of small-scale agriculture, and then abandonment and allowing the forest to regenerate. Forest management is harvesting in timber plantations, or also clear-cut or selective logging. Wildfire is any loss driven by fire, with the exclusion of fire that's used to convert land to agriculture. And then expansion of settlements and infrastructure, and finally other natural disturbances, which can include insect outbreaks that cause tree mortality, landslides, hurricanes, etc. So to train the model, we collected a set of over 7,000 training samples. We labeled the dominant driver using very high resolution satellite imagery from a number of sources. And we also use Landsat and Sentinel-2 time series information. Oh, yeah, sorry, forgot. 30% of our data was also collected using an active learning process, meaning that we identified areas where the model was performing poorly or dynamics that were not well represented in our training data. And specifically targeted those areas for additional training data collection. So we used a ResNet deep learning image classification model with various input data sets shown here. So this includes Landsat and Sentinel satellite imagery, the Global Forest Change product from the University of Maryland, as well as various ancillary data sets. And our input data was resampled to a common spatial resolution of approximately 15 meters, and non-binary layers were normalized. We also augmented the input data used for training the model using random rotations and flipping to avoid overfitting, and we ended up producing a global model. So here are our results. So this is our global map. The different colors correspond to the different drivers of loss. Just note that we're making some final adjustments to the model, so I have here results subject to change, but they should remain largely the same for the most part. So we found that permanent agriculture was the leading driver of loss globally, causing 34% of tree cover loss that was mostly concentrated in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Wildfire was the second largest driver globally, driving 28% of loss, primarily concentrated in temperate and boreal regions. Shifting cultivation drove 9% of loss globally, primarily in Southeast Asia and Africa. And then hard commodities represented a relatively small proportion globally, less than 1%, but was significant in some regions and countries. Oh, sorry. Oh. So here I'm going to go through a couple examples. So on the left we have planet imagery, and on the right, in white at 30-meter resolution, we're displaying the global annual tree cover loss data. And in color, overlaid with the tree cover loss data, is our 1 kilometer driver's map. And the color opacity corresponds with loss intensity within each grid cell. So here's a region in Peru. So in the middle, this pink area is gold mining. On the left in blue is natural river meandering, and on the right is agricultural expansion. Here we have an example in Malaysia. So this kind of surrounding the orange area in green is selective logging, that kind of spidery pattern up there. And then in orange, loss associated with the establishment of palm oil plantations. And then finally, this is tree cover loss due to landslides following Typhoon Morakot in 2009 in southern Taiwan, classified as other natural disturbances. So we also collected over 3,500 points to assess the accuracy of our product, and as well as conduct a sample-based assessment. So the proportions that I showed earlier were based on calculations from our map, but we're also producing a sample-based assessment with standard errors. So we're finding that the overall accuracy for the majority of our regions is over 90%, and we're right now working on finishing up this accuracy assessment and preparing to submit the paper, and hopefully release the data early next year. So just very quickly, I'm going to touch on this other work stream that is mapping the annual drivers of forest loss from 2001 to 2022 at 30-meter resolution. So this, we're currently testing approaches and have preliminary results for Europe and the Mekong region. So for this work stream, we are mapping the driver of each disturbance event at an annual level. And for this, we're currently using a machine learning classification model, random forest, that's based on Landsat imagery as well as other ancillary data sets. The basis for this model is actually the University of Maryland tree height change product. They have an annual tree height change product available for Europe and the Mekong region, so that's why we've begun testing in these regions, but they are preparing to release that globally, hopefully soon. And initial testing has shown over 80% accuracy for this model as well. So just to kind of wrap up everything, this is showing how the improved data can increase the insights that we derive from it. So on the left is the original product that I mentioned at the beginning, the 10-kilometer drivers of forest loss data that was released in 2018, which classifies this whole area as forestry. In the middle is our 1-kilometer product, which detects tree cover loss due to the expansion of this mine in the middle. And then finally, our annual driver of loss product that we're currently testing. And this example is in Czechia. So we're really excited about the new insights from this data, and yeah, looking forward to answering questions or speaking with any folks about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Niti. Oh, sorry, we're going to do questions at the very end. If you can hang out, it'd be great. From Azam from G University.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming. So today I'm going to talk about how we can use or how we have been using GeoAI to assess local anthropogenic and climate in understanding the vegetation dynamics in India. So I'm Niti and my colleague Harini, we are working on this for some time now. So next slide please. So when we talk about so GeoAI, we have been using AI in geography since many decades. Then what is this GeoAI? Why this new term has to come? So this was the question which came to our mind when we started looking into GeoAI. There are several definitions we can find in literature. One way some author has defined is like GeoAI is combination of geospatial big data, AI and computing. Combination of this is GeoAI. Another way, someone has, Yanovich has mentioned that it is a subfield of spatial data science. Another buzzword, it is basically GIS science, which we have been doing for a long time, that utilizes advancement in techniques and different data sets to support the generation of more intelligent information. So what is there exactly which we can consider GeoAI? So one important component is a spatially explicit model. So we need to use something which is more spatially explicit, which can differentiate between AI and GeoAI. And there has been literature, there are literatures indicating that when we use GeoAI generally or spatially explicit model, those models outperform the general model when applied to spatial data. Michael Goodchild and others have mentioned few of the conditions which are necessary to be considered as GeoAI. First one is invariance test. That means that if an AI model developed for a geographical area, the same model cannot be exactly transferred to another geographical region. The model performance is not going to be the same. Representation test. Whatever phenomena we are studying that need to be spatially represented. Formulation test. In the formulation of the model, one must consider the spatial concepts. So in terms of when we talk about, since early time in GIS, we talk about the neighborhood, concept of neighborhood. And then the fourth, outcome test. That means that spatial structure or form of the output will differ from the input. So, okay, sorry. So our objective was, can we use GeoAI to differentiate between the climate and anthropogenic activities which are going on and affecting the protected areas in India? There are more than 900 protected areas in India. Out of that, we are working on 250 terrestrial protected areas, which are of size greater than 100 square kilometer, and largest protected area is of size 20,000 square kilometer. So the main data set and methodology which we are using is the AVHRR NDVI dataset from 1982 to 2022. So it's 41 years of data, along with Terra climate data, which is also for the same 41 years. And we summarize it across the elevation gradient, because we have elevation ranging from less than 100 meter to more than 4,200 meter. And the methodology which we are using for this is, first of all, we wanted to describe the dynamics, vegetation dynamics. For that, the change in vegetation can be either gradual or abrupt. So gradual changes we are looking into by using seasonal trend analysis, and the abrupt change, that is the sudden change in the vegetation, we are looking into using Petit test. And then comes the GeoAI part, where we are using different climate data to understand the variability in vegetation, and whatever we cannot explain using the climate, can we see if there is any trend in there describing that there is some anthropogenic activities. Here is, when we say seasonal trend analysis, it was developed at Clark Labs. It is basically trend in shape parameters for the seasonal curve derived from harmonic analysis. Just a very simple illustration. The x-axis are the months and y-axis is the NDVI. So basically it decomposes monthly NDVI into different harmonics. Harmonic 0 gives the overall NDVI, that means what is the annual NDVI, and harmonic 1 gives the annual cycle, that means what is the maximum NDVI in that particular year and what time is the maximum, and then the harmonic 2 gives the semi-annual cycle. So we used the first two harmonic to describe the change. So here what you're seeing in the left side maps are the increasing trend are shown by the green color, and declining trend, whether it is in annual NDVI or early or delay in greening, is shown with the green color. What we found was here in the right side are the proportion of protected areas which are going through significant change in either harmonic 0 or 1, that means annual NDVI, or the changes with respect to annual cycle, that is maximum NDVI has significantly changed or the timing has changed. What we found was that at higher elevation there was early greening, whereas at lower elevation there was delay in greening. After looking at the gradual changes, we looked into abrupt change, and we wanted to see if it has to do anything with the climate, and so we looked into if there is any association with the El Nino events. And we plotted, so here y-axis is the proportion of protected areas, so everything is done at pixel level. So then we had taken like, okay, what proportion of individual protected area along different elevation gradient are seeing the change. What we found was especially at higher elevation, at lag 1, that means the changes, the year when change was detected was just after the El Nino year. And then comes the GeoAI. So here is the AI constellation, and we can see that there are a number of techniques which has come up over the years. Here we are using lasso, ridge, and elastic net regularization regression approach. The idea was if we can describe the variability in NDVI, can we see with respect to different, which are the drivers which are responsible. Just to quickly go over that ridge, lasso, and elastic net. Especially these techniques are used when there is multicollinearity and these when there is multicollinearity and when there are irrelevant variables which may not be making sense. And we made it spatially explicit by using the lagged NDVI. That means that we are looking into spatial relationship with neighboring pixels, what is the NDVI values. And the result was quite astounding, though this is a preliminary result. The graph shows the R-square value, again plotted across the elevation gradient. So elastic net, which in fact involves the properties of both lasso as well as ridge regression, though little bit, but it could explain more variability in terms of model compared to the other techniques. And in the right side are the most important predictor which we found in this analysis, and what we could see is in the higher elevation it is mostly the maximum temperature which is responsible, whereas in the central India, which is basically semi-arid as well as Deccan Plateau, and we found that minimum temperature is the most responsible contributing factor. And in the southern part, which has the Western Ghat and some other Deccan Plateau area, what we found was precipitation being the most important contributor to the variability in the vegetation. But there were some places like in the Sundarban Delta, that's the protected area there, as well as in the east coast, as well as the Kutch Desert, where we found there was much more driven by NDVI relationships. And then we looked into the trend in the trend in the residual NDVI, whatever is explained by the climate variables, what is not being explained, if there is any significant trend there, which we found there was some of the trend available, especially at lower elevation, we saw more increase in NDVI, whereas at higher elevation there is decline in NDVI, which could be associated with the forest line. The decline, whereas the increase in NDVI at very lower elevation could be related to the agricultural practices which is happening at that level. So basically, GeoAI, it's an emerging field packaged in a new package, right? So it has immense potential. What we found in our analysis that a spatially explicit model on NDVI revealed the varying impact of climate at different elevation. At higher elevation, maximum temperature was the most contributing factor, whereas we saw that in residual NDVI, where we are talking about the anthropogenic activities, the most of the variation could be associated with the agricultural practices. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. We're now going to switch into our flash talks to round out the session, starting with Erin Bunting from Michigan State.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Like I said, my name is Erin Bunting. I'm from Michigan State University. I'm not just your IT person for today, back in the back changing over slides, but I'm also here to talk to you today about some work that we've been doing for the last 4 years, funded by the National Science Foundation, where we're mapping out heat wave patterns across the continuous United States and linking it up to environmental health. So we've probably seen a lot in the news on extreme heat, not just across the US, but across Europe, globally. We heard it this morning as well in our keynote talk. But what we're also starting to see more commonly brought up in the literature and in even major news articles is the idea that heat waves are changing in their shape, size, and patchiness. And so that's the impetus for this project, is we're looking at these new dynamics of heat waves that we're seeing across the globe, but we're going to focus in the United States. And what we're doing is we're pulling two theories or two bodies of literature together, extreme value theory from climatology and landscape ecology, land change science together to look at duration, magnitude, patchiness, and shape of heat waves. And we're mapping those onto the landscape, developing indices that we can then look at changes in environmental health associated with. So to give one example from a 4-year project, I only got 3 minutes, so I'm going to give you just one small example here. We have taken time series of NDVI, so vegetation greenness, and also of soil moisture. And we run trend analysis on this, just man, kindle, and then send slope. And what we did is we then reclassified that data into the positive and negative trends. So negative vegetation patterns, or negative greening, positive greening, negative soil moisture, positive soil moisture. And we're bringing those together in a way so that we can look at the coexistence of where the vegetation is greening down in conjunction with where we have significant soil moisture changes, or vice versa. And we're using a really traditional approach. Ooh, that does not look as good as it did on my computer. But we're using a really traditional approach like we have in remote sensing science with just land cover change trajectories. So we can look at different climate windows and see how the NDVI is changing in those different climate windows. And so what we ultimately come out with is we can look at this across the landscape. And so what you see on the map here is, we call them our blobs. And these blobs here are areas where we have high persistence of heat waves, high persistence of overlapping heat waves from the 1980s onwards. And we've mapped this out using one of our developed indices. We call it CHCI. And what we're seeing is, if we look at the SPEI, or soil moisture patterns, and the vegetation greenness patterns inside of these blobs versus outside, we're seeing highly significant difference in both the soil moisture patterns, the greenness patterns, and the two combined. And this is across multiple climate regions, not just one or two. So ultimately, since I need to wrap up, my 3 minutes are up, what we're doing is we are working with emergency managers to model this landscape, to give them this data, to develop indices that they can use in their work, policy development, etc. And all of these papers have been published. So if anybody has any questions, there's 3 papers that I just showed in 3 minutes. That was pretty impressive. So thank you very much, and I'm open for questions at the end.
Thank you. Up next, we have Ashish Mishra from the Indian Institute of Technology.
All right, we'll manage. So this is about me. I'm a final year PhD candidate at Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and my major research interests include urban climatology, dam cover modeling, and urban heat island events. So I also look into the extreme heat wave patterns across Indian cities, and I have published around 8 research articles and 3 book chapters in several international journals. Next. So why do we need this study? So rapid urbanization, as we know, it's a major challenge across the globe, and especially in countries like in global south. India is one of the countries which is facing a rapid urbanization issue, especially in the past few decades. Urbanization doesn't come with a single problem of accommodating more people into a lesser area, but it comes with more associated problems like drinking water, sanitation. Yeah, so I'll quickly wrap it up. So this is the methodology that we have adopted for our study. So sentinel images we have used here, and for machine learning technique we have used MLPPN, that is a multi-layer perceptron language. To assess the build-up patterns, we have used one index, which is NDBI, Normalized Difference Build-up Index. Next. So this is a colorful map of Indian states and Indian cities. So we have primarily selected 4 cities which are facing rapid urbanization in the past few years. Next. So I'll just quickly go through the results, what we have achieved from these study. So Delhi, for Delhi city, it has from 2017 to 2023, we have used the sentinel images, and we experienced the expansion of built up from 11%. Now using this MLPN language or ML technique, we have also predicted the expansion rate from 23 to 29, which is 13%. Next. Bangalore, which is also known as Silicon Valley of India, which is also the IT hub of India subcontinent. So the expansion rate observed from 2017 to 23 was 11%, and which is going to further increase from 23 to 29 as 16%. So a marginal increase of 5% over the next 6 or 5 years. For Mumbai city, the expansion rate was 7% because some of the area is reserved as a lake area and the green area. But the prediction of expansion from 23 to 29 will be across somewhere around 11%, which can also be seen in the images. Bhubaneswar, it's one of the important temple cities of India. So it has observed the expansion. It is already a huge urbanized city, which has experienced a decade. Yes, I quickly wrap it up. So, so there are several parameters that are used in this MLPN technique, machine learning technique. It depends what data you want to consider as an input for a prediction of your model and what you want to skip. So these are certain input variables that I have considered for my prediction model, which can also be used for different cities. Next. So I'll just quickly wrap it up. Together, as we know, we can shape cities that are more livable and aligned with our goals. And SDG also, it focuses more on sustainable cities and, goodwill and good health and well-being across cities. I want to acknowledge Global Land Program for the, for gratefully providing the travel grant to attend this conference. And I have also created a GitHub repository for all the work that I have done, compiling all the Google Earth Engine codes and Python codes that I have used. So it's free to open, anyone can use and use their study area and predict the urban expansion. Thank you.
Thank you. And to round out the session, I will be talking a bit about wineries of the Cape. Again, Hannah Herrero from the University of Tennessee, Department of Geography and Sustainability, and we'll be talking about land cover change in the Western Cape province, Cape Wineland specifically. So on the right-hand side, we have our map of all of the wine regions of South Africa, and specifically we're going to be talking about the area that is in pink, or dark sort of pink there. And since 1994, the wine industry in South Africa has nearly doubled in the number of wineries, but the area of production has actually decreased, and there's been more of a focus on the quality of wine over the quantity of wine. And of South Africa, that region right here is the largest wine producing region that accounts for about 95% of national production. However, winemakers in South Africa have dealt with a lot of challenges, from climate change, including drought, to disease and other socioeconomic pressures, including bans on winery sales during COVID. So our research objective here is to use Landsat data with a deep learning, a convolution neural network, to model vineyard area in 2013, 2018, and 2022. And the reason that those dates were chosen were because we had access to government data that is flyover at a field level that maps every single crop in the Western Cape region. Something else to really link into the theme of this year's GLP meeting is this really big commitment to conservation that winemakers in South Africa have. We're currently working on a manuscript about how they are conservation champions, and this is through the framework of the WWF Conservation Champions designation. So they have a commitment to biodiversity. They're working both ecologically as well as socially to make these more sustainable systems. So with our methods, you can see how complex this landscape is. And so with that, combined with the fact that we had this very high resolution training data for the Cape, we decided to go with a deep learning model. We used Landsat 8 imagery from those 3 dates, as I said, corresponding to the flyover data. And just as of this past couple of weeks, we have the 2022 data being implemented here, which is why it's not included in this change trajectory. Prior to this, when we had these 2 dates and we look at our conversion away from wine, which is what our red signifies on this map, we have almost 10% of this area that has moved from wine to a different type of crop. And again, that was related to things like water use and economic policy. And in the top right, we do have our updated now 2022 land cover map as well. And in that, you have a vineyard being designated by that pink color, mostly in this area. And all of these had very high accuracies. So to wrap this up, the use of deep learning, when coupled with that high spatial resolution data in mass, was very accurate in identifying our vineyards across this landscape, which are really important to understand how they're changing over time in this very vulnerable region, both ecologically and socially. So if anybody has any other questions, thank you. And I think we can take a few questions for any of the speakers now at this point. So is anybody? Sure.
Hello, everybody. I should have done that question before I stood up.
I will bring you a mic. Hopefully this one works too.
Well, I guess I'll ask you a question on behalf of maybe everyone who might have a similar question. I came to the presentation thinking, for someone like myself who doesn't have a background in coding, how can I use AI to, not learn coding and get something just by talking to ChatGPT? I've never even tried that before. So I see people here using deep learning models. Some of them I recognize. I know enough about them to know that they are heavy-duty exercises for computer scientists, sometimes at least, coding and special programs and apps and so on. But I wonder what scope is there for someone like myself just to walk into ChatGPT and say, hey, go into Google Earth Engine and crunch this data for me and give me a table. Is that a thing? Is that possible? Do people do that?
Maybe pair with a land change scientist who's working on that. I don't know. Does anybody want to take that? You want to go for it?
So I'm not the AI guru here or anything like that, but maybe just to give you a quick idea. So there are, for example, GIS plugins that would allow you to identify things that would be linked to SAM. There's GeoSAM, it's a segment anything model. So you have an image, you point out to a particular region, for example, a tree, crop field, vineyard, whatever, and the model would try to identify similar regions in the image. This is kind of low threshold without any coding at all, but then there's also initiatives of larger institutions and in the private sector as well that have this approach of screening entire image catalogs or image archives, but for particular things. So I think it's Planet. We're doing this queryable Earth kind of project where you can say, I want to see all the airplanes in the VHR data or so, and they will bounce you back images with airplanes. So stuff like this exists, but maybe somebody else wants to add.
Yeah, I guess just two comments on that. So one very active area of development is foundational geospatial models, which are essentially self-supervised models that are trained on massive amounts of data. They're not at the point where someone with no coding experience can go in and use one, but I think people are interested in developing interfaces where users can go in with a lot less training data, like maybe even go in and manually drop points, and then essentially fine-tune a foundation model to do some sort of mapping exercise. So that's something to, I guess, look out for. And then just one other thing I wanted to say is I think something that our organization is looking into that's interesting with, for example, large language models is maybe changing the interface that people use to interact with existing data. So like creating chat interfaces where people can enter a platform and say like what data is available on this, this, and this, and kind of have a more user-friendly experience to analyze data that's available on a specific platform. So that's, I guess, one area, not necessarily mapping from scratch, but yeah, an interesting way for people to interact with spatial data if they're not necessarily familiar with it or know how to use it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the talks. I'm Rachel Carmenter from the University of East Anglia. I wanted to ask a question to Michelle and Lucy. I was curious, Michelle, if with your data where you show shifting cultivation, deforestation, how do you account for the fact that some of that will only be deforested for a number of years and then return to fallow, and then regenerate as forest? And I was also curious about the wildfires because I saw an absence of fire in, for instance, the Brazilian Amazon. And so I was just wondering, will you bring fire into that forest degraded through fire or, so those were questions. And then for Lucy, I just wondered, I saw you've been to the field with the photos, so I was curious on whether you've spoken to the people who live in those landscapes and if they have words recognizing those distinctions in the particular savanna types that, you're identifying and working on mapping. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So this is exactly why we wanted to differentiate shifting cultivation from other forms of agriculture, was because it's temporary cultivation for a period of time, and then the forest regenerates. So we essentially, want to differentiate that so people are aware that that's more of a temporary disturbance. Even though the forest may be degraded afterwards, it's not necessarily a permanent conversion to agriculture for a long term. So that's a good point. And we were very careful about that distinction during the training data collection process as well. And then just on the wildfire question, so For example, if fire is used to essentially like burn trees that were mechanically removed and then convert to agriculture, that's not included in our wildfire class, but escaped fires, for example, that spread outside, that we do want to map that as fire. It probably wasn't visible in that global map, but that does show up in the tropics in Brazil, for example.
Yeah, so the question about local names. So Caatinga actually translates to white forest. So they are, I guess their description of it is based on, seasonality, how it has leaves part of the year and not part of the rest of the year. So that's how they're differentiating it rather than kind of canopy cover, that kind of thing. In Africa, it's really challenging because there's hundreds of local languages and they change at a really tiny spatial scale. So, for example, I was doing fieldwork in Mozambique this year, and kind of 3 hours apart, the names for the species and the types of forests are different. So you can imagine that there's so many different ways of describing it. So that's really challenging to incorporate. I think I forgot to say it's all at 500 meters scale, so I think you probably have to go even finer and think about sort of community level mapping to incorporate that level of detail. Yeah, so not yet, it's a challenge.
Anyone else? Oh, okay, in the back. In the very back.
I have a following question about shifting cultivation drivers. I want to ask what the situation between shifting cultivation and the transition stage of shifting cultivation. So, like in some shifting cultivation region, they cut the fallows and they do the plantation on the fields. So, what's the situation of this kind of smallholder plantation that they look quite similar to shifting cultivation mosaic pattern?
Yeah. So I guess, the way that we distinguish shifting cultivation from other forms of small-scale agriculture is looking at the entire time period of our model, so from 2001 to 2022, and just look for signs of regeneration. So, if there's a clearing in one portion of the 1 kilometer cell that we're looking at, that might remain for X number of years, 5 years, but then starts to naturally regenerate after a while, or just also kind of looking a bit at the broader context and seeing if there's these sort of rotational patterns that are temporary over that 22-year time period, and then regenerate. So that's mainly what we're looking for, is like what we can identify in that 22-year time period. If it seems to be cleared and then persist for many years, all through the time period, we would classify that as permanent agriculture. But of course, that could eventually be abandoned. So we're not going to perfectly capture like every regional dynamic, but just what we can observe during the time period.
Yes, thank you. Because I'm doing shifting cultivation mapping, so I'm also select the samples. Although I found that the mixed landscape is quite tricky to handle. So you use the yearly data to try to do a post-processing for the prediction, and before that, your model also include plantation and shifting cultivation to see whether the model is clever enough to distinguish those type, and then you use the time series data to do post-processing. Is that, if I understand correctly?
Oh yeah. So sorry, it's not a post-processing step. Just that's essentially what we use to determine the label in the training data. But then for the actual modeling, we use Landsat imagery from the first and last year of the time period, so from 2001 to 2022, Sentinel imagery from 3 years, and then a couple of ancillary data sets. So really we're using the spectral information of sort of like what it looks like kind of towards at the beginning and then towards the end of the time series.
Okay, so this is during the sampling stage.
Yes, yeah. So as we're making the labels and training the model, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
happy to chat further and be interested to hear about your work as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more here, and then we might have to wrap it up.
I have a question for Hannah. I wanted to ask you what kind of deep learning or CNN you used, and if you have like some information about if you compared it to other models and which models has worked better than.
Yes, we did compare it to a random forest model, and they performed somewhat similarly, but this one did perform a few percentage better, and since we had access to the data, and again we had to use Landsat because of how far back our field data went, we did end up going with this, and then we'll incorporate the newest date into the change as well soon.
So was it a UNet or?
Yes, sorry, yes.
If you're going to give me time.
Yeah.
So this is another naive question, somebody just getting into it, but between one of you, so for example, where do you get 7,000 training samples? Where is that generated from? Let's say I'm just looking at some drone images, have some trees, and you just get an army of people to map out, or where do you recommend getting these 7,000 training samples?
Yeah, 2 years of manual interpretation of imagery. So it was myself, my colleague Radost, and then a team of, I think we had 7 analysts working with us at various points, but it's super time intensive, and we tried to use existing data sets. So for example, EASA has a crowdsourced data set that they created that kind of maps somewhat similar concepts, but it just didn't quite meet the definition or time period that we were looking at. It was one year topic, so ultimately, just based on the quality, we decided that it was worth the effort to have really high quality training data and invest in the time.
Manually, like making polygons?
Yeah, so